Tonight, almost 1 million people without power in Quebec. High winds, downed trees, and rising rivers.
I mean, all those trees are not supposed to be in the water.
We're with residents as they assess the damage. Toronto confronts a new flare-up in gun and knife violence.
I was shocked. This is about our babies and about their health.
Why was Amazon delivering expired food to some Canadians? And holding Boeing to account for the MAX 8 disasters. Our expert panel has it covered, the view from passengers, pilots, and the law. This is The National. It's been a very wet, very windy start to November for people living in parts of central and eastern Canada, and an enormous number of them have to cope with the fallout without power. A powerful fall storm caused widespread destruction from southern Ontario all the way to the Maritimes. 100-kilometer-an-hour winds, trees crashing into cars, siding torn from homes, and lots of downed power lines. But Quebec has received the worst of it. Almost 1 million people have been without power, and dozens of homes have been evacuated due to rising floodwaters. Sarah Levitt has the latest on the ground.
In many areas of the province, nothing was safe from the wind. One man died after a tree struck him in the head. Another is in serious condition when bricks from this building fell on him. And scenes like this were found in community after community. This woman says a tree fell on her home, causing flooding and a fire.
We have teams deployed all across Quebec, so we're tackling every area at the same time.
This is the Yamaska River, which flows through the town of Cowansville. Residents say while some amount of flooding is normal in this area, the rising waters have never seemed so fast, nor have they flooded homes to this extent.
All those trees are not supposed to be in the water. You're supposed to have a nice, luscious lawn and everything, but yeah, not today.
As the river breached its banks, 30 homes were evacuated. Homeowners not yet flooded held their breath. In nearby Sherbrooke, the town was forced to close the main road. Homes were also evacuated as part of a preventative measure. This woman woke up to discover her car wasn't where she parked it. She says a sudden landslide caused her car to be swept down the street. Not far away, this sinkhole opened up in the middle of a road. The winds also caused accidents on highways. This semi was blown right over. Hydro-Quebec teams have been out all day, working to fix downed power lines and restore service.
Everything is under control pretty much right now, and the situation should be stabilized by tomorrow.
But it's not all good news. The worst-hit areas may not be fixed before next week. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Cowansville, Quebec.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, the effects of the storm were felt well beyond Quebec's borders. This was one of the more dramatic scenes in Ottawa today. A house under construction blown right off its temporary supports. Nearby, a branch from a falling tree smashed into this passing SUV.
So obviously when you get to a scene like this, you fear the worst, but they were extremely glad that the driver was not injured more seriously.
And over in New Brunswick, a similar story.
It's like so windy that I'm not able to walk.
I just took the doggo for a walk this morning there. He almost blew away.
Downed trees sparked small fires and blue transformers, cutting power for tens of thousands of people, and utility crews are warning some may be in the dark all night. Okay, to Winnipeg now, where outside a hospital, a vigil was held for a toddler who was stabbed in his sleep and is expected to be taken off life support.
This is a reminder that we need to protect our children. Not only our children, but we need to protect everybody's children.
Supporters prayed for strength. The family of Hunter Straight-Smith says the 3-year-old suffered severe brain damage when he was allegedly attacked in his room Wednesday by this man. Daniel Jensen has been charged with attempted murder. Police claim he had an argument with the toddler's mother before the attack. Well, in Toronto, violence continues at a shocking pace. Halloween night saw 4 separate shootings and a triple stabbing. Together, they left one person dead and several others injured. Ellen Morrow has more from a city struggling to find a solution.
Every Friday after school, this is where you'll find 14-year-old Johnny Adams.
I learned how to build resumes, how to get jobs, certain things, just life skills you can't learn just by being by yourself.
It's a community center in East Toronto, an area hit by gun violence.
There is a lot of violence in communities, and having community programs like this keeps teens out of trouble.
While it looks fun, its founder says with the lack of funding, it's not easy.
It's a case of a little too late right now, because if you see what's happening with the violence, it's at a critical mass.
Overnight, there was a fatal shooting near a school. Another shooting injured a passenger in an Uber vehicle, and there was a stabbing at a Halloween party that left 7 injured. On Thursday morning, another shooting, and this attack on Wednesday night, gunmen opening fire on 5 teenagers.
We have people who are determined or think it's okay in some way or other to even carry a weapon, let alone use it, and we just have to deal with that.
But how? The problem is daunting. There have been about 400 shootings across Toronto this year, with 34 people killed. Demands for action have been met with increased policing. But even if that strategy reduces shootings, as it did following the summer of the gun in 2005, in the long term,
once a program is ended, you have the same kinds of core conditions, neighborhood poverty, systemic racial exclusion from the labor market, that are funneling, the same kinds of young people into gangs.
And so activists argue the best way to stem the violence is through programs like these.
We have youth that come in, they're able to have that safe space, have a meal, have positive role models around them.
But many of those programs are now looking for money and political commitment. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Toronto.
As the debate over pipelines rages in Canada, the last thing the oil patch needed was a spill. Tonight, a mammoth cleanup effort is underway in North Dakota after the Keystone pipeline ruptured. It has certainly leaked a number of times before, but never this much. The Keystone delivers Alberta crude to American refineries. It ruptured earlier this week near Edinburgh, 160 kilometers southwest of Winnipeg, with more than 1 million liters of oil soaking into the ground. Carolyn Dunn shows us the cleanup efforts.
In a usually quiet, remote farmer's field in North Dakota, a hive of activity. It takes many hands to clean up an oil spill that has soaked land about half the size of a football field.
At this point, our crews are focusing on oil recovery, and they'll continue to do that until that's complete.
Up close, the spill doesn't look like much, but the rupture spewed 1.4 million liters of oil.
Basically like a whale blowing out its water. It blew the oil up into the air, because if you see the site, eventually you can see where the oil sprayed. It got caught up into the wind, and then it drifted over.
It was really heavy smelling, and I'm like, oh, are we going to blow up? It's kind of scary. I didn't expect anything like this to happen.
The Keystone main pipeline has been shut off. Analysts say that strands well over 500,000 barrels of oil per day coming out of Western Canada. The spill will likely further the divide on Keystone's expansion project, the Keystone XL pipeline. Earlier this week, while the main pipeline was already quietly spilling oil in North Dakota, a public meeting on its expansion in Montana was sharply divided.
When a pipeline spills or leaks, it often takes a very long time. There's a lot of environmental destruction that is done before that spill or leak is found or detected.
It's a needed project, not only environmentally, because of the trucking issue and stuff like that. I think pipelines are a lot safer than any other transport for oil.
When it's built, they will leak.
In Canada, the executive director of Environmental Defence says this latest spill clearly shows what can go wrong.
It's very hard to recover more than a fraction of the oil. Most of it ends up stuck in the environment and can't be recovered.
TC Energy has sent a sample of the pipeline to an independent lab to help determine the cause of the spill. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Calgary.
In California, the weather's getting a little better, allowing firefighters to get a better handle on several wildfires that have been burning for days. But there is a new challenge, a new fire putting more homes under threat. This latest inferno is the Maria fire.
Look out! All the way out!
Near where it sparked, north of LA, there are 4 others, and that was key to the initial response.
The good thing for us is we still had a lot of equipment in Ventura County because of the Easy Fire. So what we did was we relocated a lot of that equipment over to this fire.
Here, another 8,000 people have been ordered to get out as crews try to save 2,300 buildings. At least 2 homes have already gone up in flames. Meanwhile, all the other major California wildfires are now at least 65% contained, including the Kincaid fire that's been burning wine country for more than a week. And something else about that Kincaid fire, it's destroyed more than 350 buildings, many of them homes. And while in a broader sense, there's a push to stop building in areas that are prone to fire, there's still lots of people willing to take that risk. Kim Brunhuber explains.
With California on fire, many here have watched these very lands burn before. And with recent fire seasons getting worse, many live with one foot out the door.
I had most everything ready to go.
1 in 4 Californians live in areas considered at high risk for wildfires. According to a recent study, the buildings most likely to burn are found not in the wildlands, but just adjacent, buildings within 2.5 kilometers of wild areas.
4.5 million homes are in very high risk areas.
Despite the risk, California's governor says he won't ban construction in these dangerous zones because he doesn't want to limit local control or infringe on the state's pioneering spirit. But some California politicians disagree.
The garage, probably.
Yeah. State Senator Ben Allen is touring a Los Angeles neighborhood hard hit by the ongoing Getty fire.
Should more be done?
I think so. I don't know that I share the governor's perspective on this. I think we've got to be a little tighter on growth further into fire zones.
Allen supported a new bill that would have done just that, but because urban housing is so expensive, the bill didn't pass. So instead of avoiding these high-risk zones, Californians continue to build. Right now, below us, there's just brush, but soon, says urban planner Jack Eit, that will change.
They're proposing to build 19,000 homes right on the historic fire zone. There's been 30 fires in this area in recent years.
Tejon Ranch, a massive new community, will be built outside Los Angeles in a tinderbox of grass and trees boxed by Windy Canyon. Communities like this are springing up across the state, and with climate change leading to hotter, drier, windier conditions, he says, the danger will just grow.
We're putting a lot of people at harm. The only way to protect against that is not to build.
And that's unlikely, according to fire researcher Alice Hill.
We are optimists, so we don't think about this in terms of the risk to us.
In recent years, more than 90% of buildings that burned down were rebuilt. The only way to stop the cycle, Hill says, is legislation.
There are few examples of successful efforts of moving people away from their homes in the face of risk.
Last year in California, fires killed more than 100 people and destroyed almost 23,000 buildings. But this we know, most of these homes will be rebuilt, and most of these lands will burn again. Kim Brunhuber, CBC News, Los Angeles.
Okay, to Ottawa now, where commuters probably want to throw the transit system under the bus. Last month, the city introduced massive changes, but the transition has not been smooth. So today, as Hilary Johnstone explains, the mayor promised a fix.
The problems began just days after the city's light rail train started to run. When doors jammed at 2 different stations, the backup buses couldn't handle the crowds. That led to scenes like this.
I'm consistently late for work now, and my boss started taking me aside, so now I have to leave, now I have to get up at 4:30 to do all my morning stuff, and it's just ridiculous.
At first, the city kept its old buses running beside the new trains, but when the buses stopped going downtown as planned, more cracks in the system appeared. The problem is twofold.
Half the complaints that we get are train-related, and the other half we sometimes overlook are bus-related.
The trains have faced everything from signal failures to ongoing delays, and the buses that bring commuters to those trains consistently fail to show up. It's created a storm of imperfections as the capital changes how it travels. Today, the city announced it's throwing $3.5 million at the problem and will bring back some of the buses.
And that's why the extra buses, the extra dollars, I'll be announcing even additional dollars in the budget for more bus service.
These connection buses.
Some observers say they're cautiously optimistic.
It's a good thing that buses are being put back on the roads. It doesn't really solve the underlying issue, which is the reliability issue with the trains. Because until we have reliable trains, the public's confidence is not going to be there in our very expensive multimodal system.
Ottawa's mayor says the city will withhold $2.8 million from its October payment to the consortium that built the new LRT line. And it will continue to do this until the system improves. Hilary Johnstone, CBC News, Ottawa.
And we've got more news ahead, including some food for thought before ordering groceries on Amazon. Why Canadians were being delivered expired food, sometimes months beyond its best before date. And would you be ready to hop back on a Boeing 737 MAX 8? The company's CEO was grilled this week about 2 deadly plane crashes. We'll explore what happens when those planes get back in the air.
And residents of a Toronto neighborhood say they are fed up. They say this is happening all the time. Now the mayor's weighing in, and we're back in 2 minutes.
Hey there, welcome back. If you're ordering groceries from Amazon, you might want to take a close look at the expiry date. CBC News has found a disturbing trend. Dozens of complaints about products past their prime, sometimes by months. And as Jacqueline Hansen reports, questions from CBC may have prompted the company to change its policy.
It's baby food. How can they do that?
Lana Lukianova ordered her daughter Heinz baby food pouches from Amazon.ca.
When you see Amazon there, you think that's a company
That's right.
that you should be able to trust.
Yeah.
But when it arrived, it was several days past the best before date.
I was shocked. This is about our babies and about their health.
Amazon's policy stated that grocery items were not eligible for returns. She left a critical review on Amazon's site.
I was hoping that it would cause some reaction, but there was nothing. No apology, no feedback, nothing.
Lukianova's complaint is one of dozens CBC News found about grocery products on Amazon.ca. Complaints of expired infant formula, mayonnaise, salad dressing, coconut milk, and more, all past their best before dates. It's a problem in the U.S. too, particularly when it comes to third-party sellers.
And it's not just one customer or two customers.
Data analytics firm 3PM looked at the top 100 grocery products on Amazon.com. It found that 40% of sellers received multiple complaints of expired food. Amazon's Canadian site has far fewer products and sellers, but as the grocery business grows, so could the problems.
Canada will see the same sellers and have the same problems as we have in the United States.
Amazon insists it vets third-party sellers and that it has policies to ensure products have a sufficient shelf life. But most of the complaints CBC flagged were for products sold by Amazon. The company says those were due to technical issues that have been addressed.
It's all down to how they're held, how they're stored, and how they're transported.
This food safety expert says shoppers should still be wary about ordering any food products online.
The thing about online food sales, you're really depending on the seller doing all the right things.
After CBC contacted Amazon, it updated its return policy. It now states grocery items can be refunded or replaced. The company also apologized to Lukianova and gave her her money back. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
Okay, now to our national newsroom in Vancouver, where Ian is watching stories from across Canada right now.
And Andrew, let's start in Toronto, where a Twitter video has residents sounding the alarm about traffic congestion and unsafe driving in their neighborhood.
This guy is driving up on the sidewalk.
Yeah, you're seeing that right. A driver bypassing heavy traffic, riding on the sidewalk. The video generating shocked reaction. But residents of the North Toronto neighborhood say this is their new reality.
Had the incident where a woman has tried to run me down on the sidewalk so she could get ahead of whoever was here.
The congestion has increased due to construction of a nearby light rapid transit line. Toronto's Mayor John Tory weighing in today, saying there's just no excuse for this sort of thing. All of this comes as the city is rolling out the second phase of its Vision Zero plan aimed at ending pedestrian and cyclist deaths. Revenge porn involving 4 women is sending a Saskatchewan man to jail for 18 months. 28-year-old Dalen Heidel got nude images from the women when he was in relationships with them, but after breakups, he would post their pictures to internet porn sites. The victim said the ordeal has caused them immense stress and anxiety. They feared for their jobs, their family, and their safety.
We have seen an increase in these charges over even the last couple of months. So I think setting a precedent of 18 months in jail is a good start.
Heidel's lawyer says his client feels immense remorse and has accepted responsibility for what he did. And more worrying news tonight for customers of the Desjardins Group. The financial institution says more people were affected by a recent data leak than the 2.7 million accounts first reported. Now, all 4.2 million personal banking members are said to be affected. Still, the Quebec government is defending the company's handling of the situation.
In the case of identity theft, there will be significant help. It means that they're dealing with the situation adequately.
Nearly 200,000 business accounts have also been compromised by the breach. A major change in the race to become the Democrats' presidential candidate. That's one of the international stories we'll have for you in 20 minutes.
Okay, and time for a quick break. When we come back, our second look at Boeing and its bid to get its MAX 8s back in the air. As the company's CEO answers to U.S. lawmakers over 2 deadly plane crashes, you are going to come face to face with a decision in the coming months. Will you board one of those planes? We go in depth next. When a Lion Air flight took off from Jakarta at 6:20 a.m., October 29, 2018, it was just 13 minutes later it plunged into the sea, killing every single person on board.
We're watching for word on what might have caused yesterday's crash of a Lion Air jet.
About 5 months later, a second plane would crash over Ethiopia. Again, everyone on that flight died.
What brought down Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302?
Critically, in both cases, it was the same type of plane involved, the Boeing 737 MAX 8. In the months that followed, we would learn more about not just those 2 catastrophic failures, but about the series of cascading failures, one after another, that led to the crashes. From a key modification to the plane that few pilots knew existed, let alone understood, to a head office that was slow to act when they began to understand just how flawed their plane really was.
We are sorry.
Those details have come to a head before U.S. lawmakers, where for days the head of Boeing, Dennis Muhlenberg, was grilled about his corporation's failure to prevent either of the crashes. And families, too, have said their piece.
The decisions that they made before and after the first crash caused the deaths of my family.
Now, we will surely learn more in the coming months, and Boeing says in a matter of months, the MAX 8 will fly again. But the question then will be, now what? Every Friday, we take our second look at a story from the week and try to break it down in a way that's interesting, insightful, and empowering. So tonight, we're going to try to understand what was at the heart of those 2 crashes, what happens once Boeing says it's solved the problem, and then as flyers, what are we supposed to do at the end of the day? Carry on like nothing happened? We have help joining us from across Canada and the U.S. Natalie Kitroeff of the New York Times, who's been reporting on the Boeing disasters extensively. We have Raymond Hall, aviation lawyer and former Boeing pilot in Vancouver tonight. And Gabor Lukács, passenger rights advocate, joining us from Halifax. Hello to all of you. Let's start with Boeing's bottom line. The company's profits have soared in recent years. Look at this, $5 billion in 2016, $8.5 billion in 2017. $10.5 billion in 2018. Then a steep drop in the 12 months leading up to September of this year. Boeing's profits only about $3.8 billion. Natalie, as we try to understand Boeing, I mean, the numbers certainly tell us about the opportunity in this industry. What have we learned about Boeing, the company?
So we know that global aircraft manufacturing is essentially a duopoly. You have Boeing and Airbus. And at the time that Boeing was launching this plane, the 737 MAX, it was under intense pressure because it faced an unthinkable defection. American Airlines was about to place a huge order with Airbus. Now, Boeing had to rush in order to keep up with Airbus. It was months behind. And so time pressure and competitive pressure played an enormous role in the development of this plane.
Right.
We know also that the company...
And well, I was just going to say, and on a technical level, I mean, how did those pressures affect the plane itself? I mean, there was one system that controlled the pitch of the plane that was particularly vulnerable, right, to a single specific weakness.
Right. So Boeing introduced a new system on this plane called MCAS, which contributed to both crashes. The reason it needed this system was in order to make the plane fly like its predecessor. The system pitched the nose of the plane down. Boeing was trying to limit training for pilots on this plane, again, in order to satisfy its airline customers. And so it never informed pilots that this system existed, and pilots were never trained on it when they began flying the plane.
Raymond, is it fair to say that weakness of the plane might not have led to those two crashes had pilots known about that weakness to begin with?
I think there are two aspects to it. First of all, you have to know that it's there, and you have to know how it works and what corrective action to take in the event that the action is inappropriate at the time, particularly when it's relying on a sensor that is faulty.
Gabor, one other thing I want to ask you about. We also learned about the working relationship between the FAA and Boeing. One is supposed to oversee the other. Does it really work that way?
Unfortunately, what we have witnessed here is a common problem in the airline business and in other areas, simply described as regulatory capture, where the body which is supposed to exercise oversight over a particular industry is starting to act in the interest of the industry and not in the interest of the public.
Natalie, how in your work, I mean, what have you learned about how that actually works, that relationship?
Well, the FAA, the regulator in the United States, hands over much of the responsibility for determining the safety of an aircraft to Boeing. And in this case, the FAA never received a safety assessment of this system, MCAS. So investigations have determined that the regulator was not fully aware of how it worked when it cleared the plane to fly.
Okay, let's talk about where all of this leads. Right now, we don't actually know exactly when the MAX 8 will be recertified to fly, but take a look. Air Canada says it's going to keep its MAX 8s out of its schedules until at the earliest February 14th of next year. WestJet says it's pulling its MAX 8s at least until January 5th, 2020, and Sunwing says it expects to have its MAX 8s back in mid-May 2020. But maybe we should start with even a more basic question than that. Will the MAX 8 fly again? Raymond, yes or no, and why?
Yes, it will. Once the problem is analyzed, determined, and fixed, it will fly again. And I anticipate that they will come pretty close to meeting that schedule. And the reason that I suspect that is because when the MCAS system was originally designed, not for this aircraft, but for a Boeing fuel freighter for military fighter jets, that system incorporated the systems that this particular system avoided on three aspects: the ability to know it's there, the ability to control the aircraft, and the number of times that the system intervenes. When they change it, which they are going to do, to put it back to the system that was originally designed in the military freighter aircraft, which has had no incidents whatsoever, I expect that the certification will come together after a sufficient amount of testing and a thorough investigation by not only the FAA, but the foreign regulators as well.
Right, and Boeing CEO, I mean, he said in a written statement that when the 737 MAX returns to service, it will be one of the safest airplanes ever to fly. You think that's true?
It could very well be. In fact, I did not fly it, of course, because it arrived after I retired from Air Canada, but I flew as a passenger on it several times, and I loved the airplane itself, save for this problem that is really a systemic problem in the certification, design and certification. Save for that problem, it's a fantastic airplane.
If the MAX 8 is approved to fly again in the United States, does that mean it'll fly again in Canada?
Obviously, Transport Canada is going to have a major role here, and particularly since recently the FAA has been legally precluded from doing the certification. It's all since the last year been delegated to the manufacturers. So I expect that Transport Canada will have to have a very active role in determining that the recertification in the United States is correct, and that we are satisfied that it is safe to fly here.
And how soon would all of that happen?
I would expect it would happen at the very beginning of next year. In fact, I understand that Air Canada is planning to start pilot training to refresh everybody at the beginning of the year, well before the February 14th introduction in the schedule, if it proceeds at that point.
Okay. Now, having MAX 8s in the flight rotation, of course, is one thing, but whether people will actually want to fly in them, that's a whole other question. You're going to hear from Paul Giroge right now. He lost 5 members of his family in the second crash, including his wife and 3 kids. But I want you to listen to a part of a phone conversation that he had with one of our CBC reporters, Laura Lynch, on the question of whether he would feel safe flying a Boeing 737 MAX 8 again in the future.
But if the international regulatory bodies do their own reviews and certainly say that it can be approved to fly again, then I think we can trust that. But we would want the public disclosure of what Boeing has done in order to improve safety of the 737 MAX.
So that is striking, coming from someone who has lost family members in one of those crashes. So the question, to fly or not to fly. The 3 of you, could I just do a quick round here? Natalie, once the FAA certifies this plane to fly again, and in the Canadian case, Transport Canada makes that decision, would you fly on one of these planes?
I mean, I frankly think that the vast majority of passengers in this case are going to be the ones to decide this question. I will say that Mr. Muhlenberg said this week it will be the most heavily scrutinized plane in history, and I don't know that that's an exaggeration. I do think that this is the most thorough process, this recertification process that we've seen in a long time.
And Raymond and Gabor, your takes. Raymond, quickly.
I second that opinion. In fact, there is no question that the scrutiny on this aircraft is far greater than any of the other aircraft that have ever been certified.
Gabor, how much power do people have to decide whether they get on a Boeing 737 MAX 8 if they buy a ticket for one?
Unfortunately, people are quite powerless in this regard, because once the aircraft is certified, it is the airline's decision which aircraft they use. The problem is how it is going to be recertified, and I'm quite concerned that Canada may be too quick to follow the FAA in that. I would want to hear from the European authorities and from Australia at the very least to see what they have to say about the recertification before I would feel comfortable with Canada recertifying the aircraft.
And Gabor, once you've booked a flight on one of these planes, can you say, no, I actually don't want to fly on the MAX 8, book me on a different flight?
Unfortunately, passengers don't have the power to tell the airline which aircraft they want to fly on. The airlines do have the right to swap an aircraft, even if when you buy the ticket, it looks like you are flying on an Airbus. They can swap it later on to a Boeing and the Boeing 737 MAX 8.
Natalie, though, I want to give you maybe the final word, how you think people will see this entire saga that's unfolded and how it might affect the future.
My sense is that the lasting legacy of these crashes, and I think it's something that the family members of the victims want, is going to be a more urgent move towards structural change in how we approve aircraft in this country and perhaps across the world. The Europeans delegate to industry as well, and I think that's being looked at very carefully in this country. And we are on the brink, I think, of potentially major changes about how we determine the safety of aircraft. I think that will be the lasting legacy here.
Natalie, Raymond, Gabor, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do stick around. Up next on The National, life without plastic bags. Months after a ban went into effect, we visit the first province to go without to see how folks are dealing with it. We're back in 2. This week, Nova Scotia voted in favor of banning single-use plastic bags province-wide. That law kicks in next year. But it's not the first Canadian province to turn its back on bags. PEI banned them months ago. So we wanted to know how it's working out. Kayla Hounsell takes a look.
So you brought your bags today? Awesome, thank you.
Bringing reusable bags to the grocery store is becoming more common across the country. But on Prince Edward Island, it's standard practice. The province banned plastic shopping bags 4 months ago after Asian countries where Canada was shipping plastic stopped accepting them.
We were shipping 30 million carry-out bags out of province on an annual basis. To put that into perspective, that's about a tractor-trailer load a month.
While other municipalities like this one in New Brunswick still don't know what to do with all their plastic, Moore says the number of bags on PEI has already been radically reduced and that soon there won't be any plastic shopping bags on the island at all.
It's good to save our planet, and I mean, we're the ones who are living in it, so we're indirectly saving ourselves.
The law makes it mandatory for businesses to charge for any kind of bag, $1 for a reusable bag and 15 cents for a paper bag. The idea is to curb the dramatic increase of other kinds of waste, but it's also a source of revenue, and for some, an opportunity.
We're sort of going back to our roots, if you will.
This food packaging company started in 1935 by providing burlap bags for island potatoes. Now it's offering burlap bags of a different kind.
There are a number of different products that we've brought on because of this ban, and it allows us to serve different customers. So certainly it'll increase our sales slightly.
The remaining plastic bags on PEI come here to this recycling and manufacturing plant in Nova Scotia, where they get turned into plastic lumber and used to build things like picnic tables. The owners disagree with bag bans.
With all these plastic bag bans coming into effect so quickly, industry hasn't really had a chance to develop a new market for this material.
So you don't need a bag?
Back on the island, store managers say they're not getting any complaints.
What's weird for us is when we go to New Brunswick or somewhere else and they give you a plastic bag. To us, that's like out of this world, like why are we doing that still?
But there are more changes to come. Sobeys is planning to ban plastic bags nationwide by the end of January. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Charlottetown.
And we have more news ahead on The National. Ian will be back in 2 minutes' time with a big name dropping out of the race for the White House. But first, in case you missed it, this is how bad the air quality is in New Delhi right now. The smog so thick, a health emergency has now been declared. School is canceled until Tuesday. And this stunning step.
Mask distribution may be.
The government is handing out masks to kids to help them breathe easier. Commuters are wearing them too.
Gale mein jalan padti hai.
This man says his eyes burn and so does his throat, that the smog hurts. India's capital is one of the most polluted cities in the world, and it is generally worse this time of year, but air pollution now is 20 times what the World Health Organization considers safe. To try to fix it, construction is temporarily banned. Cars can only be driven every other day, and there are plans to plant more trees.
Welcome back to the National Newsroom in Vancouver. During a run for the U.S. Senate last year, he was a darling of Democrats, but tonight, Beto O'Rourke has stunned supporters by announcing the end of his presidential campaign.
We have to clearly see at this point that we do not have the means to pursue this campaign successfully.
The 47-year-old was struggling to qualify for the next Democratic debate after months of lackluster fundraising efforts and dwindling enthusiasm in a jam-packed field. 17 other Democrats, though, are still in the race. Police in the UK say a second man has been charged for the deaths of 39 migrants. Their bodies were found in the back of a truck near London more than a week ago. Tonight, police confirmed that all the victims were from Vietnam, and investigators there have arrested 2 men. The alleged truck driver had already been charged. British police have begun proceedings to extradite the 22-year-old man who's from Ireland. In Iraq, tens of thousands poured into the streets of Baghdad to demand the fall of the government. It's reportedly the biggest day of mass demonstrations since the fall of Saddam Hussein. As protests enter a second month, the main complaints concern widespread corruption and promises for change that have been unfulfilled. At least 155 people were wounded today as security forces used tear gas and rubber bullets. 250 people have been killed over the past month. And new security concerns now surround one of the most popular apps in the world. TikTok is used for making and sharing short videos. It is extremely popular with teens. But the U.S. government has started a national security probe into the app, saying it wants to determine whether TikTok's Chinese owners are censoring content and to find out how they store personal data. Time for a quick break. Up next, Hollywood takes on a chapter in U.S. history. Harriet Tubman, her escape from enslavement, and her legacy here in Canada as well. We're back in 2 minutes.
Harriet Tubman was a 19th century abolitionist and a self-liberated conductor on the Underground Railroad. Now, this icon of American history is getting the Hollywood treatment. And as Tashana Reed tells us, a Canadian city plays a small role.
You got to be miles away from here for dawn.
Her life is one historians marvel at.
Whoa, easy now.
I'm gonna be free or die. Harriet Tubman escaped slavery, only to go back to lead others to freedom.
God don't mean people to own people.
She's one of the most famous abolitionists of the Underground Railroad. Now her real-life superhero story is a movie called Harriet.
I wanted to tell her story as gracefully as I possibly could. I wanted to make sure that she was honored in the right way.
Follow that North Star.
Tubman's journey following the North Star ultimately led her to St. Catharines, Ontario.
You are welcome here anytime.
The last stop on the Underground Railroad. While the city is briefly featured in the film and unfortunately misspelled, Tubman called it home for nearly 10 years. Her legacy still very much alive there.
Just to think that the mighty woman known as Moses, the liberator, the freedom fighter, actually settled in St. Catharines and worshiped at this church.
Tubman spent many Sundays here at the Salem Chapel British Methodist Episcopal Church, built 164 years ago by African-American freedom seekers.
You heard about heroic figures.
Rochelle Bush is a historian and church trustee. One of her great-grandfathers was a minister here in the 1850s when Tubman attended.
If Tubman wasn't here worshiping the Lord, we know that she was here during the conversations that occurred with regards to the slavery question.
Liberty or death.
While the movie condensed timelines and added fictional characters, Bush says it's about time Harriet was celebrated. Just a few minutes down the road is Harriet Tubman Public School.
When we come in and we see her statue, to be able to point towards someone of integrity, someone of strength and bravery that they get to aspire towards, that's really special.
She was so brave.
The students here feel Tubman's presence every day.
When I see that statue, I feel great. It teaches me to be kind.
She's basically saved many lives as she could, and she didn't have to do that.
There's nothing more you can do.
Don't you tell me what I can't do.
And now audiences will get a chance to see the power of Harriet in a whole new light. Tashana Reed, CBC News, St. Catharines, Ontario.
And coming up on The National, our moment, and it's about Halloween costumes that may just be in the running for the most Canadian costumes ever. That's next. Well, Halloween isn't just about the candy, it's also about the costumes, of course, and one Fredericton family went all out, even making their very own, well, you see it right there, Zamboni. Their theme was Halloween night in Canada, and they appear to have taken it very seriously. The story behind it is our moment.
Somebody posted that there was a Mountie costume for sale at a store nearby, so that was all I needed. When we got talking about, what represents Canada, because we were going to have a Mountie, we're going to have Anna Green Gables, we were going to have Don Cherry, of course. Well, we need to have our double-double, so we'll have Tim Hortons on there. And Hockey Night in Canada, and we had CBC News logo on it, we had the Hudson Bay. The kids have a John Deere Power Wheel that we use every year. and we just build on it. It usually involves a lot of cardboard and basically anything we can find in the garage. At this point, we have a lot of people who are waiting impatiently for Halloween night to see the reveal. It's just so much fun. They laugh, everybody's clapping their hands, and it makes everybody happy. So it makes it all worth it for us.
It actually drives and it holds people. I can't believe that. That's nuts. And Ian, I saw on your Twitter, you had a pretty crazy Halloween too.
Yeah, so there are a few neighborhoods in Vancouver that just have a lot of kids. We ran out of candy in our house at just over 1,000. I think it was 1,007. Some people were skeptical. One of our other neighbors posted pictures, and I think it's been picked up by the newspapers. He had 1,400 kids. The couple did, the family did at their house.
How much candy do you need to serve 1,000 kids?
Well, we clearly didn't have enough. We ran out, so yeah, crazy amount. And you were out with your daughters, and there you moved to Toronto from Vancouver into the rain.
Yeah, don't remind me. Yeah, it was brutally cold and brutally wet and brutally windy last night. I thought I'd left that behind, but hey, it's all good fun. That's the National for this November 1st. Good night.
Good night.